Conquerors have come and gone through the ages, men whose strategic genius brought victory into battle and forced subjugation of the conquered peoples. But it is rare that the conquered men accept their fate for long. Soon after their defeat, they start conspiring against their forced masters. In order to utterly break the spirit of the conquered, to turn them into a truly servile people, another type of leader is required, not just a simple conqueror. A man who combines victory on the battlefield with grand strategy and statecraft. A man who is simultaneously feared for his cruelty and worshipped for his generosity. A man whose name echoes through the vanquished nation's collective psyche. Basil, the Bulgarslayer. The Bulgarians established their first state in the Balkans in 681, acquiring seemingly permanent control over the former Roman provinces of Moesia and Dacia. They had since had continuous contact with Eastern Rome, a contact characterized by brutal conflict for 350 years, during which the battlefronts went back and forth between the new and rising Bulgarian state and the long-established and wealthy Roman Empire. Bulgarian leaders like Khan Krum or Simeon the Great dreamt a complete rule over the Balkans, while Roman emperors like Constantine V or Theophilos attempted to contain and weaken their northern neighbors. Both sides achieved successes, but neither of them reached its ambitions. Through centuries of conflict, Bulgarian culture was reinvented. Starting as pagan nomads with a Turkic or Iranic origin in the 7th century, the Bulgarians of the 10th century consisted of a centralized Christian state, speaking a Slavic language, while being heavily influenced by Eastern Rome on religion, architecture, and culture. But this situation was not meant to last. In 969, in a true Byzantine fashion, the dynamic Kievan Rus, invited by the Romans, invaded the Bulgarian lands and essentially subjugated the Bulgarian state. Next, the Kievans would be in turn pushed back by the Romans under Ioannis Tzimiskis, who would claim governance over the entire region. However, this would not be the end of Bulgaria, as a dynamic Bulgarian revolt soon took shape under Samuel. Samuel managed to drive back the Romans again and essentially revive the Bulgarian Empire. Against this new foe, Emperor Basil II launched a series of yearly campaigns that slowly weathered down Samuel, with the end goal of completely removing the Bulgarian state, and if possible, the Bulgarian identity itself, incorporating the once lost Roman provinces in the now resurgent Roman Empire. This second part would pose the biggest challenge for the Romans. The empire had managed to defeat multiple enemies in battle, but very rarely had an entire new region been conquered by Constantinople. Justinian's conquests had been impressive in size, but easy to manage administratively, as much of the population was accustomed to and even desired imperial rule. Nikephoros' focused conquest of Crete would also be different, as the scale of the conquest was much smaller, and there would have still been a substantial amount of Christian Greek speakers on the island at the time, making the administration easier. Even in Syria, conquered by Nikephoros Phocas and Tzimiskis, a big part of the population was still Christian, thus by default loyal to the empire against their Muslim surroundings, while the governance of the region was mainly focused on warfare. So, after Basil's conquest, the Eastern Roman Empire, used mainly to defensive wars, was tasked with reincorporating a region long accustomed to independent rule, with a vibrant and distinct culture. It is thus impressive that the conquest persisted for 170 years, even during times that the empire was at the brink of collapse, and the Bulgarians could have attempted to establish their independence again. In order to achieve this monumental feat, which would prove even more impressive than direct victory in battle, Basil II and his administration employed strategies based on 4 pillars: intimidation, tolerance, faith, and empire. The subjugation of Bulgaria was not the result of a regular conquest campaign. Normally, the conqueror would target the enemy's strategic points, Fortresses, places of power, like capitals or big cities, ports, or even monuments or places of religious or symbolical significance. The control or destruction of those points would crumble the enemy, who would usually negotiate a surrender. However, in those cases, the war's loser would still hold leverage in negotiating terms. Basil's campaign aimed at all of those targets, but most importantly, he made sure that the entire land of the enemy had capitulated under his terms. Village after village and town after town, all the Bulgarian lands fell into the hands of the Romans with his consecutive campaigns. He managed to cut off communications between Samuel and many of his possessions during the war that lasted 14 years. These grinding campaigns left a deep feeling of defeat and subjugation into the Bulgarian zeitgeist, the national spirit of the era. Unlike lost wars when the defeated populace couldn't grasp the defeat physically, like it was the case with the defeated Germany after World War I, the Bulgarians were aware of the defeat firsthand. Adding on top of this, Basil completed the conquest in the most fierce way possible, the blinding of the 15,000 prisoners of war. According to the legend, only 1 out of the 100 Bulgarian prisoners, after the Battle of Cleidion, was left with one eye, just enough to be able to guide the other 99 back. The actual numbers and the brutality of this deed are still disputed today, but it can be asserted with certainty that an act of immense cruelty befell the defeated Bulgarians. The sight of this army of ghosts would definitely crumble any will still left in the Bulgarians to continue the war. Samuel himself is said to have died due to the shock caused by seeing his once mighty army. After witnessing this, who could dare to fight on against the mighty and cruel Basil? But despite complete defeat on the ground and in the soul, the war would still drag on, with a lower intensity, for 4 more years. Samuel's nephew, John Vladislav, would continue the resistance along with much of the royal court of Bulgaria. The young Bulgarian king, with the remaining Bulgarian army, was trying to siege Dyrrhachium. But the endeavour failed, with the Bulgarian leader being killed by the defenders of the city in 1018, thus ending the last resistance against Basil. After this final defeat, Basil decided to implement a tolerant policy, both for the nobility and the populace. The royal court of Bulgaria, following John Vladislav, surrendered to the emperor, finalizing any other resistance against him. Basil used the Bulgarian royal treasure in Ohrid to award his troops and guaranteed the safety of the entire Bulgarian royal family. The family consisted of John Vladislav's 6 sons and 3 daughters, and some of Samuel's sons and their own children. The entire family was transferred to Constantinople, escorting the emperor on his return to the capital through the Golden Gate. The Bulgarian royals were treated with dignity and respect, not with the humiliating parade that was customary for defeated enemy leaders through Roman history during traditional triumphs. In continuation of the ceremony in the capital, much of the Bulgarian royalty and aristocracy were given offices in Asia Minor, in order to keep them away from their potential power base. Even more impressively, one of John Vladislav's daughters, Catherine, would become the wife of Isaac Komnenos, a future emperor. Thus, the nobility, given power and status in the empire, would be kept content with the conquest and would not support a revolt against the imperial government. Regarding the peasantry, Basil allowed for the subjugated farmers to pay taxes in kind, grain, millet and wine, instead of currency. This measure would greatly benefit them, as peasants would have a hard time accessing coinage, and even if they could acquire it, they would be volatile to central government control, who had influence on the currency's value. This measure was particularly important, as when it was recalled in 1040 by eunuch John the Orphan, under the rule of Michael IV. The biggest Bulgarian uprising during the 170 years of Roman rule broke out. This rebellion was particularly interesting, as it managed to get control of a big part of the former Western Bulgarian territories, even endangering Thessalonica. However, the Roman state was still very powerful at that point, and managed to quell the rebellion quickly. Most importantly, The rebels did not have the support of the former Bulgarian elite, as it had already been incorporated into the ruling apparatus. Thus, Basil would manage to keep all strata of the conquered society somewhat satisfied through tolerance, and even alienate them from each other. Practically, the old Bulgarian nobility would be non-existent at that point, thanks to assimilation. New men would take their positions, but only after several decades. Bulgaria officially converted to Christianity in 864. This would not be a smooth process, but the Bulgarians would have been a firmly Christian nation by 1018 AD all over their social structure. The conversion of Bulgaria would also entail its incorporation into the interstate church structures of the era. While initially jockeying between the jurisdiction of Rome and Constantinople, the newly founded Bulgarian church would agree to be overseen by the Patriarchate of Constantinople, while becoming its own archbishopric. A decision unprecedented at the time. The Bulgarians would thus have significant independence over church matters. This independence would rise at an even higher degree after 934, when the Bulgarian archbishop was elevated to the rank of patriarch, alongside the patriarchs of Constantinople, Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria, as a result of a favorable peace treaty. However, after the Bulgarian conquest of Tsimiskis and during the rule of Samuel, the Bulgarian patriarch's position would be precarious. During Samuel's initial rebellion and his protracted war against Basil, the patriarch would move his seat multiple times, ending up in Ohrid in 990, the center of Samuel's power. Basil's terms imposed on the Bulgarian church would be relatively lenient, but at the same time, deeply strategic. Ohrid was downgraded into an archbishopric again, but was given jurisdiction over some lands that already had Greek bishops, directly controlled by Constantinople. The Archbishop of Ohrid, John de Bar, possibly the last Bulgarian patriarch, would remain in power with his title downgraded, but the next archbishops would be chosen directly by the emperors and would thus usually consist of Greek monks. Additionally, the bishopric of Silistra would be assigned directly to Constantinople. Thus, Bulgarians would in theory maintain some autonomy in their church matters, but would be greatly influenced by the Patriarchate of Constantinople. Nevertheless, the Slavic language and Cyrillic alphabet would remain in use in the Bulgarian church as a result of this relative autonomy. Many of the Greek church officials would not dare to impose Greek in the liturgies, as the populace's reaction would have been unmanageable. Subsequently, the Bulgarian oral and written language would remain in use during Roman rule, serving as the small slice of freedom keeping the population away from revolt. The new territory would be administered in a strategic manner by Constantinople. The conquered lands were divided into two new themes: the theme of Bulgaria and the theme of Peristrion, while part of the land was given to the existing themes of Dyrrachion and Nicopolis, up to 1025. Dividing the once unified lands into smaller units would not only serve a practical purpose, but also a symbolic one. Bulgaria was now just a vague geographical term, with its name only surviving as a Roman province, covering only a part of the once mighty state. Additionally, with Bulgaria conquered, there was no more a northern buffer to the north of Roman lands, and thus new strategies would have to be developed to counter the northern threats, the hordes of the steppes. Chief threat amongst them were the Pechenegs. The Pechenegs, pressured by the Cumans, would migrate towards the Danubian frontier during the 10th and 11th centuries. The immediate successors of Basil allowed for the settlement of groups of Pechenegs in former Bulgarian territory, so as to effectively manage both Pechenegs and Bulgarians. The Bulgarians would now have to face this nomad people inside their own land, but with no organized army of their own. Any protection from the Pechenegs could only come from Constantinople, thus they needed to be on good terms with the central government. Basil II's conquest of Bulgaria was a masterpiece on a military and administrative level. He instilled fear through war and contempt through tolerance. He completely dismantled Bulgaria's previous ruling elite, assimilating it into the Roman system. Thus, any uprising would be disorganized and destined to fail, as was the case in 1040 and 1072. The Bulgarian church allowed for important freedoms in faith and language, but it was directly controlled by the capital, giving an artificial sense of self-determination. Finally, the empire's new subjects knew that Constantinople could and would take the privileges granted to them back at any point. The Bulgarians did not attempt an insurrection even during the empire's weakest points caused by Basil's biggest mistake: the lack of heirs. Nevertheless, the inheritance he left behind would be manageable even by the worst emperors. Eventually, the Bulgarians slowly rebuilt a new nobility and local power, and during one of the empire's weakest points, even worse than Manzikert, with the help of rural Latinized Balkan locals, the Vlachs, managed to rebuild their state. The Bulgarian wounds may have healed over time, but Basil's nickname remains recognizable until today: the Bulgarslayer.